Good morning, everyone. Good evening and good afternoon and all sorts of good things. This is the TOC show. I'm Clark Ching, and we have a bunch of people on the right-hand side of my screen here who have all come to hear the wisdom of one of my TOC heroes, which is Richard Zultner, as you see him in front of him. He's blushing at the thought of being a TOC hero, but you've got to have someone to look up to. You've got to have someone to learn from, and Richard was one of my early influences. So you might not even know that, Richard, but I've been dining out on an article you wrote for ProChain about multitasking for roughly 20 years now, and claiming it was all my idea. So that's pretty cool. And crediting you when it makes sense, to be fair. So, Richard, I'm going to hand over to you in just a moment. But as we go along, there'll be pop your questions in the little chat box there, and then Richard and I'll keep an eye on them, and then Richard's going to just look at them, and if they feel like they could be answered immediately, he'll do that. But if he's looking going, it's going to come up shortly, he'll just park that in his mind and come back to it in a minute, and we'll have a bit of time for Q&A at the end of all of this. So, Richard, do you got anything you want to say before you start properly?
I'll just get started.
Okay, good. I will mute everyone but Richard. I'll let Jack Vinston in. And there we go. Oh.
Okay. Hello, I'm Richard Zultner. Are you ready for an adventure? We're going to talk about finding your personal decisive competitive edge. So this is not going to be a typical theory of constraints or agile presentation. We're going to lean more on the theory of constraints side because that's what I'm more familiar with. There are lots of theory of constraints presentations that kind of boil down to, how I help a big company make even more money. And that's fine. And some of them are even medium companies, but what about the smallest companies, like a solo entrepreneur or just a person? So in keeping with my interest in personal TOC or entrepreneurial TOC, that's really the kind of genre that we're going to be talking about today. So this is an enhanced and encore presentation to a presentation that I did at the Theory of Constraints International Certification Organization Conference, okay, which was last month. And let me also say right off the bat that this presentation is not for TOC experts or for Agile experts, because you already know what your personal decisive competitive edge is. You are a TOC expert or an Agile expert, period. So you don't need to watch. This is for people who are hyphens or slashes. So if you are a TOC hyphen Agile expert or an Agile / TOC expert, I think you will find this very interesting. And yes, Agile and TOC are mountains, and this presentation is not for experts who are only one mountain experts. So I am not an expert, which is why I can give this presentation, because this presentation is not how to become an Agile expert. Actually, that's pretty straightforward. Get interested in Agile at the dawn of Agile, and then essentially as the Agile elevator goes up, you arrive with it on the top floor and you're an Agile expert. In TOC, very simple, just make sure that about 30 years ago, you began to work with or for Eli Goldratt, and you stick around and now you're a top TOC expert. The problem, of course, is that avenue in both of those areas is now closed. So all that's left is essentially a long period of very hard work to become a top expert in either of those fields. And by top expert, we're looking at like top 10%. So I'm going to show you a different route to get to an equivalent level that I think is more interesting and more applicable to more people. So we're going to talk not just about one mountain, but about 3 mountains. Now, decisive competitive edge. This is something that Ellie Goldratt presented. I first ran across it when he did his Goldratt satellite program. And the fact that Ellie Goldratt had to rent time on a satellite transponder to do a global presentation tells you that this was pre-internet era. Today, Clark with one hand can do the equivalent without any satellite transponders. So this is something that Ellie Goldratt was advocating for companies. And if we were talking about companies, we would talk about things like core competencies. But we're talking about individuals. So for an individual, decisive competitive edge, well, an edge, that means you have an advantage. And we're going to talk about an advantage over top ToC experts, over top agile experts, okay? So competitive, now competitive, it doesn't mean you beat them, because it's not like you go head to head in a race like in the Olympics, but it means that in or for the work that you choose to do, or the clients you chose to go after, that you are clearly in consideration. So you are competitive in that sense. Now, decisive is interesting because Ellie Goldratt was very clear that this means something like a sustainable edge. It's not just an edge that's clear. So I'm not talking a subtle advantage. We're talking a clear advantage, and it's one that's sustainable. So that would mean an edge that ToC experts or agile experts cannot copy. So that would be nice, but is such a thing even possible? Well, that's why we're going to need 3 mountains instead of 1 mountain. So I have a very nice example of what's possible. And this is the idea of a talent stack. It was I first came across it in reading a book by someone that I'm pretty sure you're familiar with, Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert. And in this book, How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big, Scott describes his personal journey and his talent stack. And his talent stack has 3 and only 3 talents. Number 1, he's an artist, but he's not a very good artist. He was always interested in drawing. He went to many art classes, and he was never the best student in any of them. The reason that Dilbert is drawn simply, it's not a style preference. Scott just isn't good enough to draw in all the details you find in other comic strips, okay? He can draw nice, simple characters. He can give his characters expressions, but that's pretty much the limits of his ability. Scott also has always had a sense of humor. He can sort of spot, the irony, and he has this kind of wit. But he was never really good at comedy, and certainly never good enough to even consider being a stand-up comedian. He also was an employee in a tech company, and again, not a great employee in a tech company. At Crocker National Bank, Pacific Bell, he rose up and then hit a ceiling, and he couldn't go any further. So his talent stack is that he is a mediocre artist. He has a mediocre sense of humor, and he was a mediocre tech company employee. And the trick is to take those 3 talents of decidedly average level and combine them to integrate them in a particular way that creates synergy. And of course, we know what the answer was. It was a comic strip aimed at Dilbert, built around characters in a tech company. So this was the first tech-oriented comic strip. And since this was an audience of growing importance, and they had no comics when Dilbert came out, they loved it. The other thing that Scott Adams did by accident is he put his email address in the comic. So the tech people that liked his comic strip would send him emails when they found this strip particularly humorous or poignant or resonant or whatever, And he learned from that. So he got direct feedback from his devoted fans, what they liked, and he listened. And he then, of course, the number of papers that carried his comic expanded. He began to produce books of, the best of Dilbert comics, and those sold. He then began to write books about his journey, and those sold. And he began to do talks to primarily tech companies about the kinds of things that Dilbert discusses. And the result of these three mediocre talents, okay, integrated in a particular area, is that Scott Adams now has an estimated net worth of over $70 million. Now, you only have to have over 12 million to be in the top 1% of net worth in the United States. So although Scott never emphasizes the fact that his comics have made him rich, that clearly counts as a successful result. He loves his work, and he can do it anywhere. And although he no longer has to do any work, he continues to do it because he likes it. So he has succeeded by finding a way to combine the skills he had, which were decidedly average, in a way that produced what he considered to be a successful result. So this idea that we can be successful with talents that are at the 50% percentile level or below is a refreshing option, I think. The key here is, for whatever talent we're talking about, you need to have a solid grasp of the fundamentals. You don't need to be especially good, but you do have to be beyond the basics, all right? And Scott spent many years in each of these things developing that kind of solid foundation. And so the only question was, how exactly do we integrate it, and to what do we apply it to produce success as we define it or as we seek it? So this notion of a talent stack is very powerful and very interesting. But let's see if we can take it one notch above what Scott Adams talks about. So what we can do is ask the question, and I think for a number of you, you have experience. You've done a lot of things. And so it's not a question of, well, I only have 3 talents. It's more like you've got a dozen talents. So you have this a cornucopia of talents to draw on. And it's simpler to just put a small number together in an integrated and focused way. So your challenge may be to narrow it down. But the most powerful talent stack is one where the talents come from different paradigms. We'll talk more about what paradigm is and why it's so powerful. Now, these talents from different paradigms, they do have to be connected. So if you say, I have a talent in theory of constraints and I like pancakes. Now, I don't see a way of connecting those, which is why I chose it as an example of unconnected things, okay? So your talents do have to have, they do have to be able to integrate and get some synergy. So there's got to be some connection between talents. But if you look at Scott Adams' talents, there's not a lot of connection there, and yet he was able to achieve an enviable success from those talents. The other thing that's important is these talents need to resonate with you. This is not something, it's not like an equation and we solve it and then there it is. These are the 3 talents, now do it and succeed. Okay? It has to be things that actually engage you. And for most people, there are at least 3 things, and generally more than 3 things, that satisfy that. So if we can take a talent stack and each of the talents come from a different paradigm, we can get even greater power. Now, let's talk about paradigms. The term paradigm is one that became popular because of this gentleman, Joel Barker. In the 1990s, he took the work of Thomas Kuhn, who had discovered paradigms in the sciences, and he realized that it had applicability in business. And so he popularized the concept of paradigms in business and succeeded to the point that today, in almost any business literature, you can use the word paradigm without explanation. You can assume the audience understands what the word means. So let's be precise. A paradigm is the way you think, and it's the way you see the world. The paradigm is really powerful. Okay, just to sort of put it in context, a paradigm is more specific than a worldview. Paradigm is shared among people. A paradigm is bigger than a mindset. Okay, mindset would be smaller, more local, generally more specific, and then smaller than that would be in psychology something like perceptual set, which is typically temporary and very situational. So a paradigm is big and it is powerful. In a paradigm, when we say see the world, this literally means that you will see something, that is, your eye will register it, and your brain will ignore it because in the paradigm you are thinking in, it's unimportant. And there's a number of classic video clips to show this. Now, this comes from the focusing of a paradigm. In theory of constraints, one of the definitions that Ellie Goldratt used was ToC is about focus. Well, every paradigm is about focus. A paradigm tells you what's important. It tells you what to focus on. Every paradigm does that. So in theory of constraints, the focus is on constraints. And that also means that it tells you what's not important. And the things that are not important, even if you were to see it, you would dismiss it because it's not important. Now, in theory of constraints, because constraints are important, and they are important for an important reason, because if we have a system, like what's described in the goal, okay, a production system, this is a logistical system with a material flow, we have clear inputs, we have clear output, the output is measured in terms of throughput. In that kind of system, what limits the performance of the system is a constraint. That's why we focus on it. What doesn't limit the performance of the system are all the non-constraints, so we do not focus on them because they can't help the system to perform more. Now, most of the work in a system is going to be on the non-constraints. Most of the people working in the system are working on non-constraints. And the theory of constraints paradigm, the throughput world paradigm, as Ellie Goldratt called it in the early 90s, actually considers efforts on non-constraints to make improvements, local improvements, to be a mirage. You are wasting your time because those efforts cannot improve the performance of the system. Now, that is powerful. That focus is powerful. It also can be seen by people outside the paradigm as a little cold, almost clinical. And it is important for the paradigm that you are in or that you are using that you understand how it's viewed by people outside the paradigm. Because particularly for something like theory of constraints, this is not a mainstream approach. So most people are outside the paradigm. Now, in a paradigm, a very powerful clue to what the paradigm focuses on is the tool set. So if we look at theory of constraints, we find that the tool set is the rigorous, logical thinking process tools. And if we examine them, they are essentially variations of a logic tree. Some of them with necessity logic, some with sufficiency logic, but they're boxes connected with lines, and the lines represent a logical connection. And all of the tools in the thinking processes, even the newest one, mystery analysis, it's a kind of logic tree. So theory of constraints is a logic-driven paradigm. And the tool set reflects that. If you look at the tool set for Lean, you look at the tool set for Six Sigma, you look at the tool set for Agile, you don't see that kind of focus. Each paradigm is different. Each paradigm has power for a certain problem or certain situations, and it comes from what it concentrates on and what it ignores. So this is what a paradigm is. So theory of constraints is a paradigm. Agile is a paradigm. Lean is a paradigm. The lean paradigm is very close to the theory of constraint paradigm because they both look at flow, but with different perspectives. And there's a variety of other paradigms as well. So if we have a talent stack and each talent comes from a different paradigm, we have something very interesting that's now an option for us. A talent in a paradigm means that you can do things in that particular paradigm that people outside the paradigm cannot do. I'll give you a specific example. In theory of constraints, the project management solution is critical chain, and specifically single project critical chain. That's a new paradigm for project management. And in single project critical chain, you can take a well-planned traditional project and you can turn it into a critical chain project, and it will be 15 to 25% shorter in terms of the schedule. Depending on the amount, depends on some characteristics of the activity network. Now, shortening a project plan in terms of schedule or time without making any trade-offs, that is impossible in traditional project management. And I mean, it is actually considered impossible. There is an axiom, all right, the triple constraint iron triangle that says, and you'll see this in project management textbooks, for a properly planned project, you cannot reduce one parameter, like schedule, without making trade-offs in another parameter, such as resource, or cost, or scope, or technical performance, or quality. So critical chain project management does something that traditional project management firmly believes is impossible. And the reason it can do it, of course, it's a different paradigm. Now, here's the key point. You don't have to be a top critical chain, single project expert to do this. Anybody can do this as long as you understand the fundamentals of critical chain project management. This is a textbook miracle, so to speak, in the critical chain books, and yet it's impossible in traditional project management. Now, when you can do something that other people, of course, outside your paradigm, think is impossible, I mean, that actually meets the dictionary definition of a superpower. So every paradigm has this property. And one thing for you to think about is in things like Agile, what is it in Agile that is easy to do, that is impossible to do in other paradigms? So if we have 3 talents, each from a different paradigm, that means there are at least 3 impossible things you can do that are legitimately impossible for people outside of those 3 paradigms. And in fact, even if one of your paradigms, let's say it's theory of constraints, it could be Agile, and of course the impossible thing that you do, anybody in that paradigm can also do it, okay? So it's not a big deal inside of the paradigm, it's only impossible for people outside. But if they only have one paradigm, then they can't do the other 2 impossible things that you do because those come from different paradigms. So with 3 talents, 3 different paradigms, that gives you a pretty unique set of impossible things that you can do. Your superpower, which comes from the combination of those talents, now becomes very specific. So this is part of the power of a paradigm, this ability to do things that cannot be done outside of the paradigm. Now, there's another characteristic about paradigms that it's important to understand. We just talked about the power, the ability to do something is possible, to actually have a superpower and be able to say that with a straight face, okay? Does not mean you get a guest shot in the next Marvel comic universe movie, though, okay? Let's be very clear about that. So your paradigm has a strength, and it's a serious strength. And that applies to the problems and the situations that your paradigm really does well on. And for theory of constraints, that was born for a production system, then extended into project management work. But as you get further away from the situations that the paradigm was developed to be so good at, you start to get to areas where now the paradigm, although it can be helpful, is no longer dominant. It only can provide good answers, no longer the best answer for that particular case. And if you get even further away, now you have cases where people are even wondering, well, why are you trying to use, agile here? Or why are you trying to use theory constraints there? So there is a strength, right? A sweet spot where the paradigm works best. And there are also weak spots as we move away from that, where the paradigm essentially doesn't work at all anymore. Although it can be extended, and the extension comes from people who are determined to find a way to make it do something in this brand new area, okay? And in theory of constraints, you can see that in the extension to project management, extension to sales, extension into distribution, retail. So paradigms can grow, but regardless of what the current state of the paradigm is, there are things outside of the current strengths that the paradigm doesn't handle. Now, those are the shadow of the paradigm. Things that it cannot, at least currently, do well or at all. All paradigms have a shadow. All paradigms have this kind of weak spot. So if we're thinking about what it would be a great combination to put together for our three talents from paradigms, the strongest combination would be one where each of the three paradigms covers the shadow of another paradigm. In other words, it has a strength. The second paradigm has a strength, and the first paradigm has a weakness. And now we've got three paradigms, each of which addressing the shadow of each other, because the experts in one paradigm, those ToC experts, just ToC experts, or agile experts, just agile experts, they have no way to deal with the shadow. The paradigm doesn't do that, and that's the price for having the power of what the paradigm does do. So when we talk about a talent stack, three talents, three paradigms, typically what happens is that people start with some paradigm, right? When you were in school, when you had your first job, you learned how things work in that company, in that industry. And that paradigm was shared by those people. It's typically a traditional paradigm. When Elliot Goldratt introduced theory of constraints, the people, only a handful of people knew about theory of constraints. Those were the ones that were the early disciples of Elliot. Everyone else had a traditional paradigm for thinking about production, and Elliot Goldratt described that as cost world thinking, the cost world paradigm. Well, throughput world is a very different paradigm. So you start with some, your first paradigm, it's typically a traditional paradigm, okay? Now, if you began with, let's say, you're fortunate enough that the first company you worked in was already doing agile, it could be that agile is that first paradigm for you. And then if you got interested in theory of constraints, you then learned the throughput world paradigm. So that would be the paradigm of the present. And then typically the third paradigm, and this is the one that is, that develops more slowly. It often involves some combination. It's often something that is not clearly defined for you, that you have to seek the definition. That represents, in a sense, your future self. It is, we can throw in a little spiritual language, it is essentially what you're being drawn to, the completing piece of the puzzle that is you. Now, having a traditional or past paradigm is useful because you have to be able to communicate to people who are not yet in your paradigm. And being able to understand how they think, how they talk, what they see, that's very powerful. Now, if you've ever had the experience, let's say that you are firmly in the agile paradigm, you're talking to people who are not there, they've read about it, but they haven't done anything, they haven't really thought about it seriously. When you talk to them, you have to be careful because some of the things that you'll talk about, some of the power, some of the advantage of the agile paradigm, that will be very attractive to them because it solves problems and handles situations that they can't do effectively in their current paradigm. But the danger is that there'll be some things that you may mention where the concept is the exact opposite of something they believe to be best practice. Okay? Specific example. In traditional project management, there is a saying, and it is so widely understood, widely believed, that most people learn it even before they start doing project management. And it is, the sooner you start, the sooner you finish. And it's like, of course, right? Well, in critical change project management, especially multi-project critical change project management, we don't do that. We actually intentionally delay the start of projects in order to finish them sooner. Now, that makes no sense in the traditional project management paradigm. And if you happen to say that, someone in the traditional project management paradigm, they may even say, wait, say that again. I thought you said that you're not going to start projects in order to finish them faster. Yes, that's what I said. Well, that's a stupid thing. In the traditional project management paradigm, saying that means either you're stupid or you don't know project management. So if you say one or two or three stupid things like that, you now have no credibility. You obviously don't know project management because in their paradigm, those are stupid things. There is no rational justification for that in the traditional paradigm. That only in the new paradigm, but they're not in the new paradigm. They're not thinking in the new paradigm. So you have to actually consider how to bring someone out of the existing paradigm into the new paradigm, and it has to be done slowly. It's not a matter of persuasion. It's not a matter of just education. Oh, they're just ignorant about things, and when I teach them these things, then they'll get it. No, paradigm shifts are hard. Shifting a paradigm in the system thinking community is the most powerful way to change the system. It is also the hardest thing for people to do. There are many historical examples of companies that died. In other words, they would rather die, go bankrupt, and everybody lose their job than shift their paradigm. That's the choice they had. And they didn't go for the new paradigm. They knew there was a better way to do it. They had clear examples in their competitors, and they did not go there. And it's not because they were stupid. It's not because they were lazy. It's not because they were cowards. It's really hard to shift paradigms. And it is not something you do, in a little 2-day class. It's not something you do by reading a book. There are a handful of people that can make that shift from those things. Most people, that's not nearly enough. It's like if you want to change your lifestyle, you want to adopt a fitness lifestyle, you want to eat nutritionally, you want to eat clean, you want to eat healthy, you want to lose weight, that's a hard thing to do. That's just a mindset change. That's not even a paradigm shift. And that's really hard to do. And just giving somebody, having them read a book or giving them a class on it, that's not enough. That can be a great start. That's not enough to make the shift happen and to hold the gains. It's real easy for people to get started in a shift over to a paradigm, and then boom, they run into a snag and they fall back into the old paradigm. Okay, so I'm going to give an example of a third mountain. Okay, this happens to be my third mountain, value world. To give you a little example of what it looks like to actually have something brand new with power to it. Because if you have gotten into agile or theory of constraints or some or your past or present paradigm a few years ago, you may not remember what it was like to actually face a new paradigm and all the questions that you had and all the struggles you went through to actually learn how to think and see in a new paradigm. So this third example is value world. And value world is bigger, older, and more powerful than theory of constraints or agile. Value world actually goes back to work done by Larry Miles, the creator of value engineering in the 1950s. And that work spread into Japan. And in the 1960s, when Taiichi Ohno was developing the Toyota production system, management at Toyota realized something very important. They recognized that with Ohno's work, their manufacturing plant would be the most efficient in the world. But they also realized that doesn't buy you anything if you're not making things people want to buy. How do we make sure that we're making things people want to buy? Well, they looked around and there was no systematic, no powerful way to answer that question. So they began to explore. In this case, they were not the only company that was interested in this question. There were two gentlemen, Dr. Shigeru Mizuno and Dr. Yoji Kao, who spent the rest of their lives finding the most powerful answer to that question. The result was the quality system of Kinshitsu Kino Tenkai, that's the Japanese label for it, typically translated as quality function deployment. And that spread globally and across industries. And in 2015, because so many top international companies were using that method for new product development, it was able to become a global best practice in the International Standards Organization standard number 16355. Okay, that is tangible evidence of something becoming the main way to do something. So this is the main way of new product development. And the core concept in value world is value to customer. So this is a completely different paradigm. It has a completely different perspective. And it has a connection to theory of constraints because your throughput comes from value, right? A customer looking at alternatives decided to order from you. They thought you had the best product or service, and that generated an order, and now your production system, now your project system can produce it. But if the customer instead had decided, no, somebody else is better, I'm going to order from them. Now you get no orders. And in both lean and theory of constraints, if you don't have orders and if customers are not buying what's already in inventory, you don't produce anymore. Now, how do you solve that problem? Well, that's not a problem that it's not a flow problem. So lean and theory of constraints don't have the tools. It's in their shadow. They don't have the focus. They don't have the tools to actually address that in a powerful way. But value world has focused on that for 40 years with thousands of people in hundreds of companies in many industries have developed a very large, very powerful, very complex set of tools to address that question. So this is just one example. It's something that's in the shadow of both lean and TOC, and I think also it's in the shadow of agile. you'll see the word value used in a lot of Agile discussions. And if you ask, what's the technical definition? So far, I haven't gotten a technical definition. I ask the same questions of lean experts. I ask the same questions of theory constraint experts. Okay, in ISO standard 16355, there is a rigorous, precise technical definition of value. Okay, it's not simple, right? It's essentially 5 pages, and there are multiple tools in this standard to allow you to discover, define, and to measure value from a customer perspective. So it is a rigorous answer to the question of what value is. And it's from the customer perspective. It's not value from a company perspective, which is a different perspective and a legitimate one, or value from an employee perspective, which is a different and legitimate perspective. This is from the customer's definition. Okay? So this is an example of a complementary third paradigm that can pair with something like T.O.C. or Agile or whatever your other 2 mountains are. Now, let me also point out that the key to the most powerful triad comes from looking in the shadows of what your first or second paradigm is. Now, there are constraints with those logic tools. The shadow is going to have things that aren't logical. So anything that has to do, for example, with emotions, with people, that's in the shadow of T.O.C. So there are a number of T.O.C. hyphen something experts or T.O.C. slash something experts that have as their complement to that something to do with people. So a social technology, you could use human synergistics, wealth dynamics, and any approach that's effective at giving us insight into people, particularly in groups. So it could come from social psychology, cultural anthropology, sociology. Any methods in that discipline are going to allow you to do things that theory of constraints literally cannot see and has no tools to deal with. All right. So if we look in the shadow, we have lots of possibilities for what would be a really great complement to that kind of approach. And just to show you, to emphasize the impossible power that you get in the value world, one of the things that puts it clearly in the shadow of both lean and T.O.C. is in value world, there's no flow of value. Any mention of value flowing, that's a metaphor. That's not an accurate technical description of how value works, okay? If to say there's a flow of value through a factory or a plant or something, my next question is, okay, measure it at the start, measure it halfway through, measure it at the end, and tell me what those numbers are. And of course, you won't get numbers for that because it's not actually flowing, all right? There's nothing wrong in having that metaphor, and there's nothing wrong in using that as an explanation of things. But when you go to actually work with value in a rigorous way, that metaphor is not helpful. So you don't find it in value world. That's not how to think about value. And because there's no flow, that also means there's no constraints on value. In order to have a constraint, you got to have a flow because the constraint limits the flow. Well, if there's no flow, there's also no constraint. So the 5 focusing steps cannot apply to value because it doesn't flow. And value can always be increased in any situation, any product, any service, any target set of customers, always options to increase value. In fact, most of the value growth methods are around choosing which ones you want to offer first or second or third, planning and sequencing them. So just to show you that things, and this is one of Joel Barker's favorite expressions, what is impossible to do in one paradigm may be easy to do in another. So if you face particularly challenging problems or difficult situations in your preferred paradigm, it may be that by switching to a complementary paradigm that is some distance away, okay, that lies in the shadow of your preferred paradigm, you can get easy answers. And remember, easy answers are something that anyone with a basic knowledge in that other paradigm can solve. They are textbook miracles. So doing these things in value world does not require a top 10% expert. Anybody with a solid grasp of the fundamentals can do this because it's a different paradigm. So we have a very interesting, very powerful model from Scott Adams that 3 talents are sufficient in many cases to construct a talent stack with enough power for you to succeed with your definition of success as you define it. All right? Does not have to be financial. It could be in terms of impact. It could be in terms of reputation. It could be, it could be fame, fortune, whatever. But 3 talents in a stack with the connections, and particularly when they come from different paradigms. That gives you a 3-mountain expertise, even though you are mediocre on each of those 3 mountains. You don't have to be even above 50%, but you do have to have solid groundings in the fundamentals. So the 3 mountains combined, integrated, produce a synergy, and that result goes by many names. Some people would call that your greatest gift. So it's your unique, or a pretty unique combination of those 3 things. That is your gift. And it's yours because it's your combination. It is what you are called to do, particularly with that 3rd mountain. It is what you are meant to do because you already have these talents, or in most cases. So you have already chosen the foundation of putting this set together. All that needs to be done is to recognize it, to sharpen your understanding and awareness, make sure you have a solid foundation, and then look for the synergy. How can they come together to produce a result that is powerful and unique and sufficient for you to be successful as you define it? All right, so that is the gist of the presentation. Let me now go and take some of the questions, okay? And feel free to type more questions in as we're going over this. There's some comments about the challenge of a paradigm. If you have not studied paradigms, or particularly if you've not actually identified a 2nd or 3rd paradigm that you're into, it's very easy to underestimate the difficulty of shifting into or adding a paradigm. It does get easier. Once you have 2, you at least know there's 2 different ways of thinking, and you can mentally shift between them as appropriate. So going to the 3rd one's a little easier. But when you're coming from one mountain to try and move to the 2nd one, it actually takes you longer than it would a novice to go up that 2nd mountain. That means that if you were there, you have the 2nd mountain at T.O.C. Expert from one mountain, they will take longer and go slower to add a 2nd mountain. And it's longer and slower the greater their expertise on that one mountain, because they're going to run into more things that are going to look stupid. It's going to take them a lot more effort to get past this obviously stupid thing and realize, okay, in this paradigm, it's not stupid, it's actually fundamental and it's powerful, and here's why, okay? And if anyone sort of is skeptical about that paradigms are hard or they're hard to see, please send me an email. I have a personal paradigm challenge where, assuming as long as you're not in lockdown, there is a new paradigm that you can visit personally and experience firsthand. I will send you to this. You'll first be outside the place where the paradigm is. You'll look in and you will see what's going on. Then you enter and you will experience it personally, and then come out, look back in there. And 95% of the people, when they are face to face with an actual new paradigm, are not able to see it. That is to say, they do see things that are different, but they immediately discount them. They say, that can't possibly be the difference for their extraordinary results. And this is why in the early days, Toyota allowed even competitors to tour their factories. They were so sure that they wouldn't understand what they were seeing that they let them come in and look. And in most cases, they were correct. They looked at the wrong things. They copied down the model numbers of the machines they were using. They didn't ask the question, okay, why did Toyota order these kinds of machines? Other choices, why did they choose this? Why do they have this layout? Why is it like this? Because that's, they were looking at the answers, but if you don't understand the thinking that led to those answers, you can't reverse engineer in a paradigm you don't even know exists. So I can direct you to experience a new paradigm, and you won't be able to tell what it is, even staring you in the face, even experiencing directly and personally. That's how hard it is to recognize even that there is this new paradigm. Okay.
Richard, did we just email you at richard@zultner.org?
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep. Okay.
Subject line, paradigm me.
Yes. Show me the new paradigm. I want to go see a new paradigm.
The new paradigm.
I want to, because there is a tendency of people who, I would say, underappreciate paradigms to think like, well, if you just look around and look for inconsistencies and discrepancies, then out of that, you can create a new paradigm. Well, technically that's correct, and that's what Thomas Kuhn saw in the development of scientific paradigms. Okay, so the relativity paradigm came out of results from a handful of physics experiments that produced results that couldn't be explained with the Newtonian paradigm. But thousands of physicists looked at that and they said, well, that doesn't make sense, and never put the pieces together. So it took an Einstein to go beyond that, right, and show, hey, no, this is a brand new way of looking at things. And paradigm pioneers are outsiders. They are not people who are experts in the paradigm they're replacing. Okay? Einstein was not a leading physicist at some university physics department, right? Patent examiner. He had a solid background in physics, but he wasn't working in the physics area. So he had nothing to lose by replacing the existing paradigm with a new one. And you see that, all over. I mean, Ellie Goldblatt. Ellie Goldblatt was not an expert in, plant production. He was an outsider. And he saw little things that other people, they also saw and dismissed. They said, oh, that's not an issue. Yeah, of course, one machine is going to have the biggest pile of inventory in front of it. That's just statistics. He saw those things. He came up with a new paradigm, and it allowed performance that was impossible with the old paradigm. So paradigms are a big deal. They're very powerful, and they're very limiting once you're in a paradigm, which is why it's really nice when you have multiple paradigms that you can draw on. And let's see. Yeah, there's a comment here about paradigm sticking. And theory of constraints, this is a particular struggle. It's known as the sustainability or sustainment, in that consultants will go into an organization, they will make the transition to, jump off a rope or critical chain in projects, and it'll be working. They'll be getting the results, they'll be doing it, okay? Consultant leaves, and then 3 years, 5 years down the road, you go back and look, and it's gone. The system, the new paradigm, has evaporated. And part of the reason for this is because to implement, particularly a theory of constraints, we don't need to get everybody on board. I mean, look at the goal. The Utica plant had 500 people in it. Okay, who actually needed to understand this new approach and actually change their behavior? Well, Alex Rogo, the plant manager, and the direct reports. That's 1% of the people. People working at the constraint, the NCX10, okay, that's another 1% of the people. The second constraint, the heat treat, that's another 1% of the people. 3% of the people in that plant had to actually make noticeable changes in their behavior and their thinking. The rest of them did not. That meant it could be rapidly implemented. But it means if the 3%, there was a change in those people, they were replaced or promoted or whatever, you can lose the solution easily because only 3% have to abandon it and it's gone. And that's not the case in Lean. And it's Agile is has less of an issue, but the issue can exist there as well. So that's something to think about. And that's the trade-off that TOC gets for being so powerful, so efficient, and so fast at producing results. It also can evaporate fast because paradigms are hard to shift. Yes, I mentioned that there are a lot of terms for things smaller than a paradigm. The one thing that's bigger than a paradigm is a worldview. So in philosophy, there is discussion about worldviews, and worldviews are often a cultural or sociological phenomenon. So with a paradigm, we're going to be a little smaller than that, but a paradigm is bigger than almost all the alternatives. So it's bigger than a mindset. It's bigger than perceptual set, you know, a mental model, frames of reference, these kind of things. Paradigms contain them, but you can change a mindset in most cases in an existing paradigm. You can change a mindset without necessarily changing a paradigm, or you go to a better mental model and stay in an existing paradigm. Okay, not always. There are characteristic tools in the new paradigms. Okay, so it is challenging to actually identify, to nail down what are all the bits and pieces that make up. For example, traditional project management and critical change project management. There are things that aren't different. There are things that are the same in both. So that's not going to be the difference. But there are concepts in critical change project management that are not present in traditional project management, and vice versa. There are also concepts where it looks to be the same concept. It's the same word, the same label, but it has a different meaning, and it's applied in a different way, and it's connected to other concepts differently. Those are the most troublesome, okay? If you talk in a traditional project management about a schedule, pretty clear what that is. You get into critical change project management, and schedule has a different meaning, and some would even argue that in the traditional sense, it doesn't exist. There isn't a schedule in the traditional sense because you're not using the project plan as a way to track progress, right? We're using the buffer to track progress. So it's a completely different approach to looking at projects.
Can I just butt in here a bit here? And I'm wondering, could you take the slides off and maybe we just go into grid view now? That sounds good. So we've got a few of you on the grid view there. So welcome to the internet, all that kind of cool stuff. I thought we might maybe just get a few little sort of chatty, little conversational things. But I want to just point out, actually, I've got a question, but I'm going to wrap it with a thought that comes first, which is I've been busy looking for Joel Barker's book, and I went into Amazon and discovered that I ordered it in 1999. And I don't know where it is because I haven't read it since then. Is there anything fresh or new Or is it? There's no Kindle version of that. There's a video you can buy that's 22 minutes long, which costs
Actually,
$700.
the best reference, if you are working at a company or have friends still working in a big company, ask them to go to the training department and see if they bought in the 1990s the Joel Barker video. I believe it's called Discovering the Future. And watching that video is a great explanation. I mean, Joel Barker still sells it, so you are not going to find it in a legitimate YouTube video. But that is a dynamite introduction. And because it's dated, it's really interesting to see what Joel Barker used as his future examples back in the 1990s and how reality turned out. So, for example, one of his examples is the Sony Walkman and how Sony developed the Walkman line, which dominated the personal music player, sector. And because Sony owned a recording company, they also owned a movie studio. They also owned they made the professional equipment in recording studios. They made professional cameras. It looked like they had this thing locked up. So the idea that a computer company would introduce a personal music player that could hold 1,000 songs in your pocket and within a decade would completely take Sony down and become the global leader in music sales is, that is a paradigm shift. Apple executed a paradigm shift on Sony and took down the undisputed global leader, and they did it in a handful of years, and they had zero expertise. Well, they had expertise, but they had zero traction in that market before they entered. So when you shift,
that's really interesting.
And another of Joel Barker's expressions is, when a paradigm shifts, everyone goes back to zero. Your past experience and expertise mean nothing in the new paradigm. And this is why new paradigms are scary to existing experts. They sense that you're talking about fundamental changes that they don't have experience with, that they don't have tools for, and then who knows if their skills will still matter. So they are not going to be receptive because they're not idiots.
There was a really interesting. The other day, I had YouTube on, and it flicked from one thing about Apple and iPads and stuff, and started playing the talk where Steve Jobs presents the iPhone for the first time, and he's talking about, we've invented 3 devices, and it turns out there's one, and then there's this moment that comes just a few moments later when he pulls this thing out, and it's showing it on the screen, and you hear the gasps of the audience where they just don't believe what they have just seen, and he just swipes across the screen with his finger, and it's really startling now to look back with it. You just go, that's everything. But at that time, their minds were just blown away. They couldn't. They just. It was like seeing the impossible. It was like this phone had a superpower, and they'd seen that the whole paradigm, I guess, of how you use the tools had changed. But you could tell the disbelief and belief happening at exactly the same time as people's minds were just boom, shocked. So Joel, is this book worth reading? I did read it once 20 years ago or more, but is it worth going back to now, do you think? Because I'm going to order a paperback copy if you think so.
The video is the best, and we're obviously in a video age these days, but the book, either Future Edge or Discovering the Future, they're not I mean, they're popular books, so they're fairly light reading. But yes, Joel Barker he was the one that explained paradigms to the business community and demonstrated that it mattered. The challenge, of course, is to apply this, even if you understand it, is difficult. To take your iPhone example, there is one particular idea or concept that was the difference between the way that the iPhone team was thinking and the way that competitors were thinking. I mean, everyone knew at that time frame that the power, you had now internet access, you had cellular data, you had chips of substantial power you could put in somebody's pocket. You now had screen technology and battery technology, so this thing could go, all day, be worthwhile time frame. Everyone knew that. And everyone was realized that whoever figured it out right first would have a huge advantage. But nobody else did, because there was one concept from the past that they were still locked in on, that the Apple team was able to discard, and that allowed them to see, the result in terms of the iPhone. So just understand, we need a new paradigm. That's a first step, but you have to be able to understand the pieces of the traditional one that you have to discard to get to the new one.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Can I ask you, I want to ask you something else that's something we discussed that was a little light bulb moment that you gave me, maybe it was pre-COVID, maybe a couple of years ago. We were chatting and I was taking my dog for a walk at the beach, and I remember you talking about it. And so we, and it's partly a historical thing that I kind of think fits with this, which is in TOC land. I arrived about 96, 97, and it felt to me like there was all this wisdom and new stuff, and I got all this stuff in my head. And you said at that stage that it was still really a young movement, and I'm putting words in your mouth here, but it was still being made up at the time. Whereas if you scroll on to say 2000, it feels like TOC had become a lot more codified. It had become a thing. There were rules. There was a dictionary, and then Ellie passed away, and it kind of just sort of never really sort of took off. It sort of started to my mind, to stagnate there. But it feels like that the mountains also have a level of maturity. And experience. So when you're creating your own DCE, you're going to be in those early stages, and then as you move along, the nature of it's going to change a lot. You're going to have certification programs 20 years out of it's a successful change. You're going to have lots of people that are training this stuff. It'll be an established body of knowledge, but in the early stages it's quite different. So I'm wondering if you could just bounce off that, but I'm really interested in that period before 97-ish, 96, 97, when I discovered TOC. What was the word like then? Because it was a different version of TOC. And I've been through the same thing with agile, early stages, and now the beast is so different nowadays. At times I don't recognize it. So would you maybe just think about it and bounce off that, would you?
Well, I think it's interesting because, in the late 90s, I mean, this was pre-manifesto agile era, and people were doing iterative development. People were getting results from incrementally building things. And so there was an awareness and an interest that here was a new approach to constructing, at the time it was pretty much software, that allowed the big problem of traditional software development, which was being able to assure delivery on time, okay? And that's easier to do with small time than big time. And the same thing in the TOC space. In production, TOC at that point was losing to lean in the manufacturing arena. And it's really interesting to look at that because it looks like TOC has the advantage. You have a charismatic genius founder, right? Presenting in English, writing in English. And over on the lean side, you have Taiichi Ohno, who, other than training Toyota suppliers, has no interest in giving competitors, the keys to the Magic Kingdom. So there was no intentional promotion by the founder of lean, right, of Toyota Production System. And it wasn't until essentially fans paid for private translations. I was actually associated with a group that actually sent people over to Japan. They bought Japanese books and journals, brought them back, paid professional translators to translate them, and they studied them. That's how the knowledge got brought over. It wasn't that Taiichi Ono was doing a lecture tour in the U.S. No, it was interested fans that brought that, and then academic interest came in, machine that changed the world, and then Lean took off, and it surpassed very quickly. It surpassed what TOC had done in production and with Drum Bumper Row, which is a beautiful and, in some sense, a more elegant solution, but did not catch on. Lean did catch on. Agile, emerging at the late period. This was also when TOC developed the critical chain project management, which addresses the problem that Agile does because it allows you to assure a deadline on large projects, right, with the buffer. But the Agile solution had more flexibility, all right, easier to implement. I mean, you can implement team by team. So there's a number of advantages of spreadability. But again, Ellie Goldratt, charismatic genius founder, seriously promoted it, okay, to the point of renting satellite transponders to present to a global audience, the approach. Did not catch on. Agile did catch on. But I think the key thing is, if we look at where these things today, okay, Agile is, this is 20 years on. Agile is established. There is a clear core of people at the top 10%. They're established. They've been doing it 10, 20 years. And to climb up to that level, that's a 10-year track. And it's hard, and there's no guarantees that when your 10 years are up, that you can make it in that top 10%. So this three-mountain approach bypasses that. You're not going to be necessarily known as a top 10% world-class expert in Agile, in TOC, but you can have the level of success you want on your synthetic mountain.
I like that. Can I just point out, Rodney, thank you. I have Canopy access through my library. So therefore, I have access to the New Business Paradigms 2nd edition video there for free, which has just made my day. Actually, that's wonderful. Thanks, Rodney. Is there any more questions we'd like here? Otherwise, I'd kind of just like to sort of maybe wrap up, because then I have some downloading and some editing and some uploading to do. Any questions there? Any thoughts? Any?
I'd like to toss out a question for your fans, and that is, and this is something to think about, not looking for an immediate answer, but here we have Clark, who clearly has a mountain in Agile, a mountain in TOC, and he also has a third mountain, but the third mountain is harder to define, but we have some very important data points. So Clark is a multi-book author. Most people have 0 books. The people who do write books, the usual number they write is 1. Clark has exceeded that. And Clark also has done podcasts, multiple episodes, and now the ToC show, multiple episodes in the, what, can we compare you to a budding Joe Rogan? You familiar with Joe Rogan?
I am. I just think it might be Bill Oddie, might be more likely comparison, but that won't make much sense to you in the States.
So these are clearly expressions of a talent on a third mountain. So when you combine TOC hyphen Agile hyphen this third mountain, we now have a Scott Adams grade talent stack. And if this third mountain draws on a different paradigm, which I believe it does, this could be awesome.
that's kind of where my head's heading. And I must say, actually, can I share something with you, Richard, which might, now, I haven't seen your slides before. I know you sent them to me, so I haven't stolen this from your slides. I just got to show you this. It's just, hope you can see that. Can you see that, guys?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, just the pure coincidence there. I'm hoping that what you're seeing, because suddenly Zoom has made my life a bit trickier. I can't see everything myself.
Let me see it.
Yep, so you can see 3 mountains.
Absolutely.
Right, okay, that's very interesting. And can you see, so I'm just on the cusp of announcing, and I'm deciding whether I chicken out or not, but I think I'm going to go with this. A ToC summit. I like the summit word because it's like got mountains in it.
Yep.
And I happen to have 3 mountains that they're slightly different to your mountains. It's just convenient clip art that ties with the word summit, because I think that the paradigm of ToC, if you sum it up for me, is that most of us think we're heading towards a summit, but it's actually a false summit, and there's a further summit further beyond it, which doesn't mean that you're failing. It just means that you've got further and further you can go to. But if you have a little look down there, what's going on in my head is that I'm trying to share as much as I can good old ToC, but I'm also trying to turn ToC on its head a little bit and sort of freshen it up and share it and get more people involved. So I think that if I'm bouncing off your question because I've been thinking about the whole time you've done this. I think the bit that my third mountain is this desire to share and to simplify and to maybe freshen up. So I'd love to know what other people think, because for me, it's one of those things that trying to figure it out and make something up is kind of it's when you're quite good at 2 mountains, trying to get the third one where you're trying to make it up as you go along, it's quite a different experience. So I'll stop sharing that. But just so you know that this thing will come out, and I'm going to ask Richard to do a talk on it, but we'll have to agree on our use of the mountains. But anyway, in about 6 weeks, I want to do a Australia New Zealand time zone thing where we have a live conference, but it's not limited to people from there. It's just that the time zones for once suit people who use valves properly. Is basically how I'm going to do it. Yusi there, who's smiling away, is going to come along, have a chat as well. But yeah, sorry, I rambled off. It was just really interesting as you're going through your talk, Richard. I could picture those, and it felt like you were talking to me. And I've got the two mountains, and the third one is it's never been a deliberate thing. It's been kind of like I just had to share. And so this is kind of part of that. So if anyone else got any thoughts about what's going on in my head, I'd love someone to clarify it for me. It'd be very useful. Or someone just tell me what to frickin' do. Anyway, would you like to react to that, Richard? Because I think you can probably see me, as the example here, a bit differently than I can. You don't need to actually say any more if you want, but whatever works for you.
The third mountain is the hardest, and it takes, it could take years for you to get really powerful clarity about it, but it's not an accident. You are moving towards something that, although you don't, intellectually have a definition, okay, when you do something and it feels right, and when it doesn't feel right. And so you are going based on that kind of intuition, and that's powerful. And 3 mountains, this is a metaphor in myth. And there are multiple areas around the world where they have sacred mountains, and often there are 3 of them. And the mountains have different meanings. So this is not, this goes deeper than just, a cute clip art. There is meaning behind the concept that can go deep. So what I would suggest is, as you started to list, I would say the supporting talents, which are clear. And if you look at those supporting talents, label them, clarify them, and talk to people and ask them, what do you call somebody who does this, 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 and this? Because there are others like you in other areas. So they have the third mount. They don't have Agile and T.O.C., but they have something else. But they have the same third mountain. And once you can define it in a way that resonates for you, you can then look at others doing that and learn from them how to strengthen your supporting talents to the level that now your mountain becomes a real source of power.
That's it. And it's learning. And actually, one of the things that my limiting beliefs is you've got to make everything up yourself. And so actually learning from others and copying from others, but also sometimes paying for other people to do stuff that I'm not so good at is a really, really, really good idea. Okay, I just got one last thought. I just wanted to share it, that it just really, really resonated me with when you're talking about with Scott Adams, was, you know, he's not the world's best drawer. He's not the world's best comedian. One of the things I found with my writing as I write is that once I accepted that I couldn't write long sentences without falling asleep the middle way through typing them, and I had to write short sentences so that I could actually write them and share them with other people. Once I realized that that was my limitation, I only have so much ability, my writing improved enormously. And it was like the Scott Adams thing, just living within what you've got and maybe getting a bit better at some stuff, but not trying to compare myself with you know, the Dan Browns of the world, who, you know, obviously the world's most amazing writers. Sorry, I've been facetious here. Yeah. But yeah, that was one of those things. So John, we've got a few things there in the comments, but John's just said, thank you, really enjoyed the QFT value part. Richard doesn't know this, but he has just agreed, or about to, in a few seconds in the future, to come on and do a bit of a chat about the QFT, the value stuff. It was another one of those things that you and Tony Rizzo forced me to go buy books on in the 90s at the same time as I was reading about Joel Parker's stuff and so on. So if you would be up to that, it'd be great to have you back, and we can milk your amazing brain.
We can go over the Melissa case study, which is for value, what the P and Q problem was to the cost world audience. So at an appropriate time down the road, absolutely, we'll do that.
Cool. That sounds very good. Okay, can I just get you guys to do a quick thumbs up? And thank you. It's been really, really interesting. And it's one of those things, Richard, where I felt like I knew it already, but I didn't until you just clarified it and laid it out. And I imagine you're all having sort of similar kind of go, oh gosh, that makes sense. So it's beautiful work. Thank you. And I'll get this up on the YouTube thing soon. And all of you will soon probably receive an invite for me to come visit an Australian, New Zealand, Toshiania, as Graham Scott here, Tokiania refers to it, TOC conference. Be very cheap. The purpose is to spread the word that TOC is actually really still relevant and interesting and has a lot of uses beyond 1980s factories. So yeah, thank you, Richard. Thank you, guys. I'm going to do the 3, 2, 1 and then click end meeting. 3, 2, 1.